Here we are with another Bleach filler arc analysis. After how long the Bount arc was, I was really excited to get a new story and to see what exactly we're getting into. It was just going to be a nice change of pace with something entirely separate from Bounts and dolls and Jokai crests and water fountains. The title of this filler arc was also much less mysterious too, and gave my brain a little more to noodle on from the beginning. The new Captain Amagai arc. Yes, the new Captain Amagai arc. A new captain. That's obviously intriguing, since it's not just a new captain to the court guard ranks, but one that's completely new to me, despite me finishing the manga. So let's talk about it. I had heard about the reputation of the Bount arc, and I know one of the next filler arcs is centered on the Zanpakuto, because not only did I used to get comments about it, but it's my friend's favorite filler in Bleach, so I've got that to look forward to, I guess. But you know what I never heard or saw anything about from anyone, ever? This arc. I had never seen or heard the name Amagai in my life, so I don't even have an inkling of what the general consensus of this arc is, since it didn't seem to have the same reputation as its predecessor. The Bount arc was known to me just because of what it is, but this? No, nothing. Maybe people hate it, maybe they consider it a masterpiece. I assume it's neither because no one has ever brought it up to me. I literally didn't know this arc existed until I was ready to watch it. And that was kind of exciting and terrifying at the same time. And it starts in a pretty strange place among the rest of Bleach. And what I mean by that is, while you could sort of fit the Bount arc's events into the space between canon arcs, even if you have to kind of force a few plot beats into it, with this arc, you definitely can't place it within the canon timeline. Episode-wise, it's randomly thrown into the middle of the Agamotto arc right after Ichigo vs. Grimmjow. No doubt to give the manga more time to get ahead, but yeah, with where it's placed within the episodes, you can't really slot it in anywhere into the main story that makes sense. Ichigo can control his mask and Uryu's got powers again, but there's no point in the actual story where this could have happened with them with those statuses, unless this took place while they're in Agamotto in the war against Aizen, and clearly it doesn't. And it's not like you can put this in after the fight with Aizen, considering how that ends for Ichigo's powers. As much as I said the Bount arc's placement must have been kind of irritating, at least that arc was kind of at a natural break point within the story. So I've gotta ask, was the existence of a completely separate 20-episode storyline that's plopped into the middle of Agamotto as frustrating as I'm imagining it was? It must have been. Even if the content of the filler's amazing, you're literally just halting all the momentum and energy from that part of Bleach, right in the middle of all the action, when we're about to get into all these battles. But at least they let Ichigo and Grimmjow finish their fight, I guess, so there's that. But yeah, for a second at the start of the arc, I thought maybe these events would be happening simultaneously with the Agamotto arc. Like, here's what Squad 3 was up to during all of that, where we wouldn't see Ichigo and our usual cast. But nope, not the case whatsoever. Ichigo and co are all over this arc, so yeah, that didn't pan out the way I was thinking it was going to. So it's best to just view this as a mostly self-contained story like the movies that just vaguely takes place in some amorphous period of time after Aizen, Gin, and Tozen's betrayal. That's really the key anchor point to the main story for this arc, and I really like that event as a setup and focus because it highlights the importance of those positions and the loss that was to the Soul Society as we are introduced to the first person to fill one of those vacant captain seats, Shusuke Amagai. One thought immediately came to mind. I don't know this man. He isn't one of the captains in the manga, so it stood to reason that something was going to happen to him by the end of the arc because he's not around in the canon material and isn't around during the rest of the anime, at least the main canon stuff that I've seen. Maybe he could show up in a future filler arc, but the way this arc ends, I doubt it. So from the very beginning, I'm thinking maybe he'll be killed by the end in some heroic sacrifice. Maybe he'll run away from his duties like others have. Maybe he'll be fired. Maybe he'll resign. Or maybe he'll be a treacherous Soul Reaper villain. Yeah, that could be it. Traitor Soul Reapers are not exactly unheard of in this series. Hell, the last filler arc had a Soul Reaper antagonist too. So maybe Amagai is that. Maybe he's a secret enemy from within the court guard ranks. Maybe. Just maybe. If Amagai had been more of a regular Soul Reaper as far as his position, we could just never mention him again in the anime and nothing would have to happen to him. He could be off doing something else away from the main story. He'd just be one of the countless Soul Reapers we have on the job in the background. But he's a captain, and Bleach takes specific stock of our court guard captains, so that makes things a little more difficult when you're introducing a captain into a filler. It immediately makes you start thinking. Not to mention, Amagai is the namesake of the arc. No, something had to happen to him, and the anticipation of that unknown something was kind of a nice little hook at the beginning. There was a built-in mystery of who is this completely unknown factor, and how is he going to operate within this world that we already know so well. Because while he replaces Gin as the captain of Squad 3, in the canon, we know that eventually my boy Rose took that seat. So yeah, Amagai wasn't sticking around one way or another. He couldn't be there when that happened. But I actually really love the idea of seeing the more immediate attempts to fill those vacant positions, even if this never really happened. In the canon story, they didn't fill those seats until the Visored were somewhat back in the fold, so there were empty seats throughout the entirety of the Irankar arc. This feels kind of like a natural story to tell. Who would they find if they tried to replace the captains immediately? It's like, yeah, we see most of the higher up Soul Reapers that are closest to the captaincy with the lieutenants and the squad seats, but I'd like to think among the tons of other Soul Reapers, there could be some talented people that we just never cross paths with. We are told that Amagai was part of an expedition force beforehand, which adds some curiosity to him because you can't help but wonder what he's been doing out there when you first hear that. And I typically enjoy the trope of someone being far away from our characters and events and then returning to take a position of authority because it brings a mix of mystery and new dynamics. Where has this person been? And what have they seen while they've been gone? How will this outside force interact with our established environment and maybe bring something new, for better or worse? It's like one of the only things Game of Thrones kept in their adaptation of Euron Greyjoy, and is one of the things I enjoy most about Zuko in Book 3 of Avatar. And it's especially interesting when it's a new leader that brings their own unorthodox method, and we have to see how characters we know handle that. Like when Kakashi was temporarily replaced in Naruto, or seeing how the clones dealt with a completely new Jedi with Pong Krell in Clone Wars. What made me like Shusuke Amagai initially was how protective he was of his subordinates. We're told that his expedition suffered 0 casualties, and once he becomes Squad 3 captain, he makes a vow that he won't let any of them be hurt, even leaping to their rescue while he's plastered because no amount of alcohol will prevent him from protecting his new allies. It was a good way to endear the audience to him with some lighthearted laughs, but a clear conviction beneath. At least, so it seemed. They did a good job establishing trust between him and his squad very quickly. He won them over, and he won me over at the same time. And looking back, yes, I may have been gullible, but this is me, remember. Amagai just seemed like an easygoing cool guy that was a good leader and funny to have drinks with, and he had all these plans to help improve the Soul Society and the court guards. His design actually helps sell that idea. It's pretty simple, and he comes off just as this low-key, cool kind of uncle figure. The kind of captain you can hang out with, but you'd also follow into battle. He's not outlandish looking and probably wouldn't stand out in the crowd, but one thing that was driving me nuts about his design was this big stack of paper tucked into his chest. I kept trying to figure out what it was, but sure enough, it's just a big ream of paper. I don't know why he carried it around like that all the time. He uses them once to help him escape at one point, but lugging a ream of paper around had to be super uncomfortable. I don't understand. It was driving me crazy, but I'm glad it eventually had some sort of purpose. As a new captain, Amagai obviously has a lieutenant, and since this is Squad 3, that means we get more Kira Izuru. I was pretty happy about this since I like Izuru and always wished we got a bit more of him, and now we do. And in a way, that's not him just being this aura farming dead man. I think that's honestly one of my favorite things about these filler arcs so far. Yes, things aren't always handled well or consistently, but these extra stories do give us more time and more opportunities with characters that weren't given spotlight very often in Kubo's main story of Bleach. Sure, they can't really have major lasting developments, but there are still chances to get to know them more, or, just enjoying watching them have some extra time and extra fights. I've said ever since Gin's death that I wished his relationship with Izuru had been explored more. He'd made him an unwitting accomplice at the time of Aizen's defection, but that never got explored in more depth, and it really should have. His captain, that he respected so much, not only lied to him, but manipulated him into helping. Yes, Gin turned out to not be loyal to Aizen in the end, but no one knows that, even though we do, and that's still so tragic. And I loved that a lot of this arc was dealing with the aftermath of Gin's defection and what it did to Squad 3, both within their ranks, but also to their standing in the court guards as a whole. Obviously, people would be side-eyeing them a little bit after their captain turned, and the arc was effective at making sure that the shadow of Gin Ichimaru still hung over everything going on. I really loved the moment when Izuru goes into Amagai's office and initially sees Gin sitting at the desk, because that's what he's used to, and that's what's now gone, with Amagai now there in his place. And initially it seemed like Squad 3 was about to have a big upgrade and a much better new leader. Izuru really can't catch a break when it comes to his captains at all. More on that later. And it's not just the captain that's new to Squad 3, but there's another member of Amagai's expedition force that joins with him as the third seat is given to Makoto Kabune. I'm gonna be frank, it didn't take me long at all to distrust Makoto. I'd like to say it was his really weird glasses, because what the hell are those? Where are the lenses? He does initially seem like a level-headed stoic guy that's showing up Izuru all the time and earning the respect of his peers, until Izuru sees a very sudden shift in him during a hollow encounter, where Makoto is suddenly super ready to kill one of their own squad members instead of rescuing him, refusing to listen to any other perspectives, even when he's outranked. It was obviously a really striking moment because they capture how suddenly his switch flipped. So it's like, oh, this guy isn't good at all. And naturally the thought came to mind that he's close with Amagai and he came from the same group previously, but admittedly, Makoto being bad didn't really convince me that Amagai was like this too, since Makoto kept this dangerously pragmatic side of himself pretty well hidden. Like, it seemed possible that Amagai was just unaware of Makoto's true nature throughout most of the arc. But yeah, Makoto's turn to villainy was pretty easy to spot, even for me. Him looking a whole lot like Xyloporo was also a little bit suspicious and probably helped with me feeling that way, but yeah. Makoto's weapon is crazy, by the way. It's like this giant surfboard-sized, double-bladed sword with a secret of its own. So yes, this arc has a lot to do with the status of Squad 3, with Izuru and our new captain Amagai, but this arc isn't solely about Squad 3. No, there's a whole other story running alongside all of this. Despite the arc's name, the focus on Captain Amagai initially runs as one of two parallel storylines that turn out to be intertwined by the end, but it takes a pretty long time for them to really feel connected. And of the two stories, surprisingly, the Amagai stuff actually felt like a completely separate subplot for a while there, as the other storyline had more episodes devoted to it, and I kept wondering why this arc was even titled the way it is, since Amagai's storyline felt like the B plot, while the other one, that got more screen time, was centered more on the world of the living, as a Soul Society princess and her two guards arrive in Karakura Town. I'm actually really glad and I think a little lucky that I watched this arc while I've been reading Can't Fear Your Own World at the same time, because they both focus heavily on the noble clans of the Soul Society, something that we know existed in the main story, but was never really given much of a direct focus. We've known characters from noble houses and could infer from them, but overall, it was kind of unexplored territory. So it's just fun to see a different part of the Soul Society, and getting to see distinct views of it in both these Bleach projects at the same time has been very interesting and timely. And while most of my deeper thoughts about the noble houses are covered in my notes I've been taking about the light novels that I'll share eventually in an analysis, this arc, we get our look at the nobility mainly through a mysterious princess, Lady Rurichio. Rurichio and her bodyguards arrive in the living world under peculiar circumstances, and naturally, it isn't long before they cross paths with Ichigo when hollows are attacking them, and Ichigo gets roped into their business, eventually becoming another person trying to protect the princess from forces that are after her. This happens a lot in new stories where you bring in a new character, often someone younger and less experienced, who has some kind of major significance, and the established characters have to protect them or help guide them toward fulfilling the best version of themselves, all the while fending off people that are coming after them. It happens all the time, so that kind of story isn't groundbreaking by any means, but I thought it was handled decently enough here. Ichigo having to kind of put up with a sheltered, somewhat bratty kid is a fun challenge to see him have to face. And when it comes to Rurichio as a character, it's tough for me because she's intentionally written to be that kind of young, spoiled, and noble archetype with a good heart beneath, which can be grating for sure sometimes, especially when she's given so much screen time and focus, but I also did find her kind of endearing sometimes too. I couldn't help but feel bad for her at how much is weighing on her when she's so young. Can she be a bit irritating? Yeah, but she's a kid. All in all, I think she could have been much more unlikable than she turned out to be, so I appreciated that. It's a fine line to walk, but I think they balanced Rurichio's character out well enough, honestly. I didn't find her to be like a huge negative of the arc, when she easily could have been, if it had been handled differently. Her two bodyguards, Kenryu and Enryu, were actually pretty fun additions that made me laugh a lot. Kenryu's design wasn't very interesting, but I loved how formal he always was when addressing anyone and everyone, even during the most ridiculous of circumstances. He really felt like some dutiful knight whose only purpose was to protect, and he reminded me of a Fire Emblem character. He could have fit in there so easily. Enryu was the strong, silent type to balance his partner out. Design-wise, he made me think of Strong Guy from the X-Men comics, most notably 90s X-Factor, but Enryu wasn't nearly as goofy as Guido is. Well, when he suddenly talks, this big brutish man actually has a voice that I can only describe as that one shrimp from Shark Tale. This kind of gag always makes me laugh. I'm a simple man, and silence being built up only for there to be a funny voice is sometimes all it takes. Amazing. I loved it. But yeah, the bodyguards bounced off of each other and their princess and eventually Ichigo's group pretty well, and I really enjoyed their shenanigans when it came to their priority of keeping her safe, whether it was looking around literally every corner or leaving others behind to save her, putting her above everyone. The three of them enrolling at Ichigo's school was hilarious for a variety of reasons. Soul Reapers joining the class or strutting around the school isn't a completely new concept for the series, we've seen that a few times, but this situation was especially funny, because it's one thing to try to pass her off since she looks so young, but to try to pass off these two bodyguards as high schoolers, that was amazing. It was straight up Jump Street in how wonderfully ridiculous it was. Like, look at that fully grown man. And I loved it being pointed out by other classmates, because it would be. Look at him. Usually a Soul Reaper coming to high school would give a certain amount of comedic opportunity, of course. They're already a fish out of water. But for these characters, it's not just going to a different realm. It's going to another social and economic class. The way they speak to others, legitimately hilarious at points to see them in the living world. We eventually learn that they're here because there's a bit of a coup happening within Mauricio's clan, where one of her retainers is trying to have her killed since she's the last living heir so he can take control. Typical, rich people, political intrigue, assassination type vibes. Initially, her bodyguards keep this information from her, which was understandable, but a little frustrating as a viewer for a while after the attacks keep intensifying. There's a point where it's more dangerous to keep her in the dark than to fill her in, especially when we're having to watch her make these really poor decisions, primarily because she doesn't know the extent of what's happening around her. But then it eventually turns out that she's known for some time, and I'm like, why were you doing all of that then? Why were you putting yourself at risk? So who are these people that are after her? Who are the villains for this part of the story? The antagonists for most of this arc are the princess's treasonous retainer Kamui and his band of ninjas. Yes, ninjas. The main one is this masked man named Hansa, and he looked a whole lot like one of my favorite ninja of all time, and whenever he was on screen, I could hear Might Guy saying Kakashi. Hansa is alright as an enemy for a little bit. He's pretty basic with no depth to speak of, but I like his design, and he gets into a few fun little scraps with our heroes. I wish there'd been more to him, but there really wasn't at all. As someone that's a big fan of 007, I'm totally okay with henchmen just being henchmen, as long as they bring some entertainment and presence and maybe a cool fight or two, and Hansa sorta did that, I guess. He's alright. He was on par or maybe slightly better than some of the bounce, I'd say. Nothing super special about him, but he was serviceable enough as a minion. The ninjas in general could have been cool. I thought, since they're ninjas, they would be doing more stealth-based things, like striking from the shadows and all of that, but a lot of the time they don't and just feel like regular old grunts. Sure, they're a little sneaky sometimes, but I wanted that to be emphasized in their strategies more. One great exception was when one disguised himself as a little girl to try to assassinate the princess. That scene was pretty wild, and yes, the twist where Mauricio at her own wedding was an imposter that stabbed Ichigo was great too. More stuff like that. They were just much more out in the open and direct than I thought they should be sometimes, and that I thought they would be. I needed more theatricality and deception. They briefly introduced this group of more distinct ninjas to help Hansa, and I thought this was going to be our villain group of the arc, and I thought this was our Espada. I jokingly dubbed them the Jonin, thinking they were going to be pretty cool and intimidating and powerful, only for them to get annihilated in one episode. Yep, I'm not even exaggerating. We get introduced to this group of visually distinct ninjas with their own special swords, and they all just get wiped out. So yeah, the ninja in this arc were a little hit or miss for me. Their leader, the guy that seemed like the primary antagonist of the arc, Kamui, is a pretty standard run-of-the-mill corrupt guy in power that isn't quite as high in the hierarchy as he wants to be, so he plots against those above him. Potentially, he could have fit into Game of Thrones if he was more layered as a character, but Kamui is pretty generic for the most part. However, I've gotta say, I loved the sheer campiness of how he'd change his appearance during his clandestine meetings. He'd dress one way in public, and then he'd switch to a monocle and he'd put his hair up and wear darker clothes every time he wanted to go scheme with his ninjas. I don't know, him changing his whole look before running up to his secret ninja attic just makes me giggle. It's just fun. It was giving Chancellor Palpatine throwing on his Darth Sidious robe the second he needed to make a call to his evil underlings. Keeping that hood under his desk the whole time, that's always made me laugh in Revenge of the Sith when he just whips it out once he doesn't have to hide anymore. But even with Palpatine, he would just throw on a hood to cover his eyes, whereas Kamui here puts in so much effort, so I have to give him some points. He really has a whole new look when he wants to do that. But otherwise, fun little quirk aside, Kamui was a pretty basic big bad, so I'm glad by the end of the arc it turns out that he was something of a red herring instead. We're getting there. The evil members of the Kasumiyoji clan and their ninjas did, however, bring a pretty unique weapon into the series. One thing that I've enjoyed in both filler arcs so far are some of the new concepts that they bring to the series, and while they may not be perfectly executed or seamlessly sit beside the canon lore, I've really liked a lot of the larger ideas that are introduced into the world through the filler. The Bount arc obviously had the dolls, which were a fairly fun alternative to the usual powers in Bleach, and this arc brought in something entirely different too, the Bakodo. Swords are a huge part of Bleach, and the Bakodo are really a dark reflection of the Zanpakuto, where the Zanpakuto have something of a mutually beneficial symbiotic relationship with their wielders, where you're really just learning to work with a part of yourself and the spirit of your sword. The Bakodo are instead parasitic, leeching off the power of the one that uses it while consuming them. The more of yourself you put into the weapon, the more powerful the Bakodo becomes, but the price can be fatal. This sword will eat you, like literally consume you if you feed it too much energy. First you'll turn into like a rabid beast, but eventually it'll completely devour you. And there were some body horror angles that played with the Bakodo that really got me in a visceral way a few times, and I loved it. The Bakodo like latches itself to you, burrowing into your body. The more power you give it, the more of you it takes away until it's like mutating your proportions or spreading across your body. It was effective in illustrating the sword taking a heavy toll on its wielder and consuming them. And while it wasn't the most gruesome thing I've ever seen or anything, I still found it really effective when it happened at getting that point across. These Bakodo also had like these like eyeball cores, and there's fleshy parts that really helped sell the weapon as a living parasite. And unlike Zanpakuto, the Bakodo could be handed off between people, and it was the blades that all had the unique abilities as well, rather than the profound connection that Soul Reapers have with their Zanpakuto. You get ones that seem basic and just increase the power in general, but then you get ones like the Mirror Bakodo, or others like one ninja had that could allow him to like meld with walls, and another one that could turn its wielder into mist. Depending on who was wielding it, the Bakodo's powers could change a little bit. Like a lesser ninja with the mirror sword could use it to like stun enemies with light. But when Hanza got it, he could feed the blade enough power so that the weapon could create a full-blown mirror dimension. And I've got to take a second to focus on something that really got me, because I did not expect to tear up during a filler arc, but I did. So I've got to give a certain sequence its flowers. Hanza's Bakodo sends Ichigo into this mirror dimension where he's forced to reflect on his past, and I love stuff like this. Mirrors can offer great visuals, but obviously are a great window into some introspection for a character, and that's what we get here as Ichigo is forced to look back on his trauma and back at the time when his mom was taken from him. And there's this really creepy scene when childhood him is mourning her only for his mom to come back, and it feels like this miraculous, joyous moment. Like I can imagine being him as a kid crying for her, and then she actually shows up. It's like when people die and you have that feeling they could walk through the door at any moment. You know, in the back of your mind, you still feel that way for a while. So it's like if that happened, but you don't see her eyes, and she starts squeezing his hand too tightly, and it was really, really effective at being so unsettling, because we know the truth, but this child version of Ichigo, this part of him that wants this to be true, is going along with it. But it was what came after that hit for me so much. Once Ichigo realized it was an illusion, and he knows it's fake, but he still takes the opportunity to hug his mom and tell her what he never had a chance to thank Misaki for protecting him. It wasn't actually her, but just having the opportunity to hold her and to say it to her face, wow. It was beautiful, and it was because he came to terms with this, with his past, that he was able to break free of the illusion. I mean, come on. Yes, I got choked up during this, and I never expected to get teary like this during a filler of all things, but that was so powerful and moving. Is it because of this arc in particular? No, not really, since it's a pretty isolated thing from the plots that are happening here, and mainly relied on emotional beats that the canon developed, and obviously for the personal reasons I've talked about before for myself with how Bleach really hit for me. So this was bound to affect me, but I still thought the execution was handled really well, like surprisingly well for being in the middle of all this anime only material. It got me, it really got me. I loved it. I thought that episode was beautiful. We eventually quickly learn the history of the Bakoto, that they were illegally created by the Kasumiyoji clan, which helps place them in the middle of that storyline, and eventually the arc's other story as well. Does it feel like I haven't talked about Captain Amagai in a while? Welcome to this arc, because that's how I felt a lot of the time. We do eventually come back around to him and see just why this arc is named after him. While the two storylines felt so separate for a majority of the time, I think they actually did a decent job in finally bringing them together toward the end. The moment we really see them connect is when we get confirmation that Makoto is suspicious when he secretly goes to meet Kamui. Suddenly, the antagonistic characters of each storyline are in the same room, and I'm like, oh, it's coming together. We aren't sure of the specifics at the time, but suddenly this whole conspiracy is much more expansive than it initially seemed. When it comes to the climax of the arc, things get pretty interesting and finally really ramp up for a bit as the two storylines converge. Lady Rarichio is taken after she turns herself over, and they attempt to force her marriage with an imposter, which was pretty wild, especially when Ichigo goes to rescue her and gets stabbed at the wedding as the Kasumiyoji clan send their regards, and for a bit, Ichigo kinda becomes public enemy number 1, because he crashes the wedding of a noble, and no one knows why, and it's this huge insult and this illegal action, and they all are chasing after him. And one of the only Soul Reapers openly helping him is new Captain Amagai, who initially offers to try to stop Ichigo since he has no personal connection with him, so there's no conflict of interest. That was a nice little wrinkle to think about. Obviously, even at this vague point in the timeline, Ichigo has done a lot of good for the Soul Society and earned the respect of many of the court guards. There's history there, so even the ones that are going after him might hesitate, but Amagai, having not been around since Ichigo showed up, wouldn't have those same potential biases, so he seems like the perfect guy to go bring Ichigo in. But he seems pretty sensible once he faces Ichigo, and he ends up helping him and allying with him, and it seems like, oh man, Amagai's a hero. He's really important here as Ichigo's only ally. Essentially, it's kind of like when I thought Ginjo was the only Fullbringer that hadn't been turned against Ichigo. It's a lot like that, actually, and I fell for it again. We'll get there. We're going to talk about the big moment. We're almost there. But before that happens, Azuru and Makoto throw down after being at odds for most of the arc, which worked out pretty well. The fight itself is decent, but what really helps it is that it's great to see Azuru take center stage. Makoto got what was coming to him the whole arc. I do think there was something missing to both that fight and this aspect of the story. I think it might have felt more right to have Azuru beat Makoto in front of the squad, since their deferring leadership capabilities had been built up, and to see Azuru prove that he was actually fighting for the reputation and honor of his already downtrodden squad against a guy that had been trying to poison that would have been nice. That would have helped really emphasize that victory a bit more, as if the whole squad got to see their real lieutenant. You know, the whole arc, they kept thinking, oh, maybe Makoto would be a better lieutenant, and it was always in question of if Azuru was the right person over Makoto, and I think you could have just focused on that part of it a bit more, and that would have given it a bit more of an emotional oomph, I think, for Azuru. But it all comes to a head as the conspiracy is revealed and the Soul Reapers fight the ninjas, and we storm into the castle, and we're gonna save Lady Rarichio from Kamui. And that, with a few episodes left in the arc, is when everything gets kind of turned on its head and we see what this arc is actually about. At this point, I was still thinking Kamui was indeed the big bad of the arc, a pretty boring one-dimensional big bad, but yeah, I thought we were about to be in a final fight with him to save Lady Rarichio from his ambitions. Was Kamui a good fighter? Probably not, he didn't look like one, but if we're going by anime rules, he was definitely old enough to possibly be a secret badass. My theory in the moment was that he was going to use multiple Bakoto at once somehow and become some deadly abomination that was more Bakoto than man. Yeah, things didn't really pan out that way at all. As we have our final standoff with Kamui, Captain Amagai suddenly shows up and kills Kamui. cutting him down, while his tone completely shifts, and it all dawned on me just seconds before the reveal as he takes Mauricio and leaves with the Bakoto cores, and we learn that new Captain Amagai was the one pulling all of the strings throughout the entire arc. So Amagai is bad. Clearly, Amagai's bad. It makes sense why it's called the new Captain Amagai arc now, if he's like the centerpiece villain. Like really. Amagai, like he was kind of chill. I feel dumb. I fell for something like that again. It's probably, looking back, it's probably really obvious. Like he didn't even do the Aizen thing of like taking himself off the board and making himself not seem like a suspect. Damn it. It's a bit of a Sosuke Aizen redux where you have a mild-mannered, likable Soul Reaper captain actually being the manipulative puppet master in the shadows. Undeniably. Even to the point of it coming toward the end of the arc. But in this case, I do think it was a bit of a mistake to have this big villainous reveal come so late into this. By the time of the plot twist, there's only like 2 or 3 episodes left, so I didn't have much time to enjoy him as a villain, or even process that he was one. This aspect of it wasn't like Aizen's treasonous reveal at the very end of the Soul Society arc, because Aizen's betrayal was setting him up to become the outright antagonist in the future. Amagai doesn't get that same luxury. I assume the other filler arcs are entirely separate, especially how this one ends, so he's not being prepared to take the title of Big Bad going forward like Aizen was. This is it. This is all we're getting from him. And because of that, we get just a quick rundown of how he was the mastermind the whole time, and he just kind of throws his motive out there. All of a sudden, he wants to kill Yamamoto because Yamamoto killed his father. Yeah, that's his motivation. That's what he's after. He wants to kill Yamamoto. I do wish there'd been some little hints seeded throughout the arc of this resentment toward the head captain, like whether it was a few looks or just subtle little things, just something, you know. Maybe there was, maybe I missed it. I don't think so though. He seemed totally cool, and yes, that was the part he was playing, but just a little something to chew on or to look back on and be like, oh, that's what that was. But no. So that's his primary focus, is I'm gonna kill Head Captain Yamamoto. But that raises a problem that they never really address. I don't even know why he wanted to kill Mauricio. Maybe Amagai resented her clan for creating the Bakoto, and the Bakoto was really responsible for his father's death, but he didn't know that at that point, and he liked the Bakoto at that point, and he used Bakoto at that point. So I don't know why he was so adamant to kill her or kidnap her, especially because he kind of stops trying to kill her once he wants to kill Yamamoto. I really don't know why he wanted her dead and why we were all targeting her. I mean, I get why Kamui wanted to, and I get why Amagai wanted Kamui's ninjas to use the Bakoto so then he can take the Bakoto cores because those have been strengthened because they consumed their users. Amagai wanting her confuses me. I don't understand why he wants to kill her or threatens to kill her and kidnaps her at this point. I don't understand. And I have gone back and forth trying to figure that out while writing these notes, and I still just can't figure it out. I've checked, I don't think he ever says. Why? It's a pretty massive hole given that most of this arc was about the bad guys going after her, and Mauricio is the focus. Maybe she really was targeted for Kamui's ambitions only, but if that's the case, why did Amagai bother taking her after Kamui was dead as like a hostage, but then he doesn't really use her as a hostage? That part of it still doesn't make much sense to me. Maybe I missed something, but considering Amagai and Mauricio were like the primary new characters of the arc and kind of the central characters to both storylines, I think there should have been much more focus on their eventual connection than what we got. There should have been something solid there that made it clear what binds these two characters together. There should have been something, because it feels like there was nothing really. I really don't know why he wanted her dead. That's a massive problem. And I couldn't help but laugh seeing Amagai go after Yamamoto. Like, of all the people to go after, you're taking a shot at him? It was just funny, especially after seeing what I've seen later on in the series. But he sort of had a chance, I guess, because his Bakodo can completely neutralize other Soul Reaper's powers somehow. That seems extremely hacks and unlikely, but given the Bakodo are created artificially, I'll give it a pass, because you could just say the Kasumi clan designed it that way, I guess. Still, it's funny that this is how people always try to fight Yamamoto. It's just like with Wonderwise being specifically created to snuff out his flame, but I bought into that one a little bit more because Wonderwise was created by Sosuke Aizen, a genius. Just like with Wonderwise, though, I feel like Yamamoto would still be able to whoop Amagai's ass with his bare hands, so I was waiting for that, but instead Yamamoto just kind of stops trying to fight or help and is kind of waiting to give a speech the whole time. He's just standing there. And I don't know if Amagai's actual Zanpakuto being fire-based could somehow reflect his connection to Yamamoto. There may be something there, but the thought occurred to me that his fire-based stuff maybe spiritually is connected to how much he focuses on Yamamoto. Amagai, as the final fight, is decent against Ichigo. It's pretty quick. Yamamoto just kind of stands there, or Ichigo kind of just stands there. It's an okay fight. Got him using his Zanpakuto, his Bakodo. One thing I really loved about the final fight was that Amagai's ridiculous Bakodo that conceals Soul Reaper powers worked on Ichigo, but only obviously part of Ichigo, and we had the hollow powers come back out, and I liked that aspect a lot. I thought that was a cool way to kind of have him be able to fight while still keeping the Bakodo's power consistent. I thought that was a nice little loophole that Ichigo sometimes gets, where he can do things that other people can't because, you know, main character, and also he's all these different things. I really liked that a lot. But yeah, the resolution after this and the explanations were a bit iffy once we got our revelations. It turned out Amagai's father was sent to spy on the Kasumi clan by Yamamoto, and once he was discovered, they corrupted him with a Bakodo and sent him to kill the head captain. So Yamamoto didn't murder Amagai's father, but instead defended himself against a man who was being turned into a monster that he couldn't help, that he couldn't save. The only way he could really help Amagai's dad was to take him out. So he killed him out of necessity. Amagai found his father as he was dying, and he heard his final words, sort of, and he misconstrued the whole situation. The moment Amagai said his dying father's final word was Bakodo, I was like, oh, he's definitely trying to warn him about those. And that turned out to be the case. Like, exactly the case. So the circumstances around his father's death are just a massive misunderstanding, and once a brief conversation happens, Amagai realizes he's wasted his whole life on revenge when he didn't need to, and he drops his villainy, where it turns out that Shusuke Amagai is kind of the Harry Osborn of Bleach, and hell, we even got an old guy revealing the truth to him way later than he should have. And it ends with Amagai deciding to end his own life after seeing how much damage he caused, and no doubt with how much shame he felt. Was an appropriate ending for his character, I guess. You know, he's obviously screwed up a lot and he realizes everything was a mistake, so it was this dramatic final moment for him. I wish Izuru had played more of a role in his final moments, or even the final fight, just to kind of lean into that a bit more, but it's pretty sudden and abrupt, this whole thing. Like I said, there's only a few episodes at the end where Amagai's the villain, and you really feel that. It feels kind of rushed and like, oh yeah, I guess he's gotta go now. But it was unique to have him kind of just be convinced to not be evil, and they didn't have to physically defeat him so much as just reveal that he's been wasting his time. It was interesting, a little beautiful, but it was very rushed and very sudden. I think I would have preferred if Amagai's villainy was revealed earlier and we got more time to kind of sit with that and resolve that. So with all of this said and done, how was the new Captain Amagai arc? There was a lot more to it than I expected there to be. It was full of political intrigue and mystery, assassination attempts, and it was a lot about being a bodyguard, and a lot to do with the noble houses, and it was very flawed. Just as the Bount arc was flawed, but for kind of different reasons. It was much shorter than the Bount arc, so it has that advantage over it, but like the Bount arc, I found that the fights here were pretty lackluster overall. A lot of them were serviceable, I guess, but they lacked a lot of punch and intensity even as we drew toward the climax. They were all kind of womp womp, and I think there was much more you could have done with the Bakoto as far as combat goes, but I don't know, a lot of the fights were kind of a letdown. One thing that the arc definitely has over the previous filler arc is a greater amount of intrigue. The new Captain Amagai arc tried to be a little more tricky with its narrative, where we were slowly told what was going on, but even then we weren't getting the full picture because the full picture was kind of split between these two parallel storylines until they eventually came back together and the revelations followed. And a lot of this arc really hinges on the dynamics that were created with these new characters. The friendship between Ichigo and Lady Rurichio was honestly pretty solid, but the Amagai side of the arc was lacking in this department, and it could have been more powerful if we spent more time showing him maybe really bond with Azuru and the squad and his fellow captains. There's some of that in there, but not as much as there maybe should have been. And it leaves the arc feeling a little unbalanced, like so much of the arc kind of leans into the Rurichio Ichigo part of it, which fair enough, Ichigo's the main character and that's where he was, but Amagai became so important to the arc that I think we really should have had maybe equal focus over there as well. It's not equal. It just leaves it feeling a little disjointed, where I'm much more emotionally invested in one side of it, while eventually they want you to be emotionally invested in the other side, and it's just not there for me. And the arc's villains needed to be stronger, because I think the threat, while ever present, feels impersonal in a way that even the Bounce did better. Like I mentioned before, Kamui and his ninjas are very one-dimensional. There's really not much to them outside of scheming for power, and there's not even much infighting like there was with the Bounce. Makoto Kabune had a lot of potential to bring some menace to the arc, but we didn't focus on that side of things enough to give him much either. And by the time Amagai takes his place as the main villain at the 11th hour with few episodes left, it just feels a little too late to really buff up the villains, you know? Like, he could have been maybe great, but there's just not enough time. And it's not helped that for 98% of the arc, we think the villains are Kamui and Makoto Kabune, and they just aren't strong enough to really carry the arc, where Amagai might have been if that reveal happened a bit sooner. I didn't love the Bounce, as I talked about then, but overall I did feel like Karia was a stronger villain than Amagai, if only just for how much more time we got to spend with Karia as the main villain. And this might seem like an odd critique, but I really wish this arc had a different name. Having it named after Amagai just puts too much focus on that character when the goal should be to kind of keep him hidden, right? Especially when he's supposed to seem like an innocent guy that we see once in a while with the way that they executed this story. If he was like the main focal point through the arc, sure, but it didn't turn out to be that way, and it just raises questions about him preemptively that I don't think the story wants you to ask so early. Like, it didn't fully tip me off in the end, thankfully, but the title of the arc did make me focus on Amagai more than I think the creators wanted me to. I was constantly wondering why it was called that when he seemed like more of a secondary factor. Like, where is he? Why isn't he in this episode? Why is this arc named after that guy? And yes, it eventually makes sense, but I don't think they want you to know that until then, you know? Call it the Bakodo arc. That makes more sense. Those freaky swords are the big new concept to contend with, as well as an eventual connection between the two main plot lines. We see Makoto and Amagai using them before we even know what they are, and hell, the Bakodo is the real cause of so many of the problems here, the cause of Amagai's motivations even. Hell, the Kasumiyoji arc might work too, since it's not only appropriate, but it would keep the focus off of Amagai, but nope, Amagai's name is right there in the opening title every episode to make you remember this guy's gonna be important. The new Captain Amagai arc is about half the size of the Bount arc, which was obviously nice, but even then I do think it ended up being a little long for this story. It's not nearly as egregious as the previous filler in that respect, but this probably could have been more effective if you cut down like 5 episodes or so. It was a little bit meandering and repetitive at times. Overall, I didn't mind the slower character-driven parts, whether it was getting to know Rurichio or Amagai better, but it just felt like it was kind of stretched stretched thin by the end. It wasn't the most exciting or enthralling story, and could have used a few infusions of energy throughout, but overall, there were some compelling things in here that could have worked even better with slightly different execution. I liked having a break from world-ending or reality-altering stakes to more personal ones like political assassinations or old grudges. Was this arc great? No, I wouldn't say great. Did I hate it? No. All in all, for me, it's a lot like the Bount arc, where both fillers have some cool ideas, but lack a lot of the energy and punch that Bleach has in its main story. And maybe that's to be expected for anime-only content, but despite the flaws, I actually enjoyed myself quite a bit while watching. I appreciate that it told a different kind of story for the series, and it's honestly solid. It's got a lot of problems, but I thought it was solid. It's a solid story with some big flaws. Since finishing the arc, I have spoken with my friend about what the general consensus about this arc seems to be, and he said it's hard to really gauge that because it isn't really discussed much typically, and I kind of think that's a shame. While it isn't essential to Bleach at all as a whole, and is certainly not the greatest thing I've ever seen, I do think there are plenty of interesting things in this arc that I wish fans would talk about or could talk about. I think there's a lot of interesting discussions that could be had about the new Captain Amagai arc, so hopefully below you guys have some interesting points about it, because I had a decent time with it. I don't know if I'll ever rewatch it, but it certainly wasn't as difficult to get through as the Bount arc was, just from the sheer size of it. But overall, decent time. It was overall fine, with some great things within it. So it did bring me to tears, so I'll always have that. I just wish that powerful emotional moment had anything to do with what was actually happening in the arc. Goodbye, new Captain Shusuke Amagai. We barely knew ya. Alright, so that'll do it for my big analysis here of this filler arc. It's longer than I thought it would be, but there's a lot to talk about with this arc, like I said. So I had a lot of notes. I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope it was a fun video. I'll see you all soon. If you want to support the channel, please comment, like, subscribe. Join the Patreon, where I'll be watching the next filler arc. Go there if you want to see my immediate reactions to that. I'll see you all soon. Take care. Bye.